after I've done all of this collection, after I've done all of the reconnaissance and information gathering and scanning and port scanning and sniffing and everything else, I've collected all of this in my war book, and I have an idea of several different avenues, right, or attack vectors that may be successful. So I craft exploit, right, around what may be successful. For instance, if I find that, let's just use an example. I find that there's a series of a series of computers on their network that are running Windows XP. Well, I will go and find, right, whatever exploits I can for Windows XP, compare it to my notes, look at patch levels, see if they've issued patches for certain exploits that I research to identify whether or not that is an avenue of success for me. Not every avenue of success is going to be successful. So you have to have a toolbox of possible vectors as to where you're trying to get to. Because understand, at this point, we have not actually gained access to the network. We just have a series of puzzles that we've solved to figure out which doors may be unlocked. So that's why the beginning part is so important. Once I have my possible avenues, then I'll go in and begin to try to gain access, either through particular systems, services, applications, network devices. The initial goal is just to see if I can gain access to the network in some manner. Now, this is not always being able to use a user account, for instance, to gain access. Oftentimes, it's not using a user account. Oftentimes, the beginning of gaining access is to be able to, for instance, masquerade as a system service. For instance, if they have not shut off the ability for null pipes, well, I can start to masquerade as a simple system service, opening up RDP. And these are things that, for instance, that would not be unusual that an IDS would normally trip on, right? If they're running RDP, for instance, on their environment anyway, seeing RDP instances coming across the network is not something that probably their IDS or IPS is going to be tuned to detect on or prevent. So typically, I try to masquerade as a system service or an application service. That way, it allows me time to figure out the next step. Ultimately, yes, I will probably need to compromise an account, but that's generally, you generally aren't going to get that lucky to begin with, right? It's usually going to be a system service or an application service or something like that you have to start as, and then you'll compromise an account. And at that point, once I can compromise an account, depending on the privileges of that account, I'll most likely need to escalate my privilege, right? And gain more privilege with that account, right? So no one kind of attack is the attack. It all keeps building on itself, depending on what my end goal is, right? Now, if I'm just trying to perform a DDoS attack or a DOS attack, I may not need a user account to do that. I can probably bring down services and applications just with having access to the services, right? However, if I want to exfiltrate data, again, depending on what ports, protocols, and services they have available, I will probably need to compromise a user account and then escalate those privileges to begin exfiltrating that data. So just kind of keep that in mind, that every step is not the step. It's just, one more step on the pathway of success. Now, once I've gained access, either with simple access like a system service or general user account, all the way up to having admin privileges, right? Or domain admin privileges. I need to figure out a way to maintain that connection, right? To maintain that access. I don't want to be here for long. But I do want to be able to come back, possibly, right? I do want to be able to come back and regain that access without having to go through all those steps again. Now, the plain vanilla way that this is often done is through rootkits or Trojans or something like that. But again, generally, rootkits and Trojans have a tendency to make a lot of noise on a network. And what I mean when I say noise, unless it's a brand new rootkit, right? That, for instance, you may have crafted, or a Trojan that you may have crafted, there's more than likely going to be a signature for it, and an IDS is going to trip, and now once you leave, you're not going to be able to come back in, right? So the maintaining access part is not necessarily going to be available to you. So at this point is when preferably you have compromised a user account, and kind of the golden goose, right, is if you've compromised a user account that permits you to create another account. That way, even if the compromised user account is disabled or shut off or somehow detected, I've been able to create another user account for myself that I can then log in again at a later time, right? So that's kind of the preference, but it's not always available to you. Sometimes you'll have to drop a rootkit, or you'll have to drop a Trojan on the network to to continue maintaining that access. But the likelihood that you are going to be detected, or that payload is going to be detected, increases greatly versus the likelihood that a newly created account will trip on someone's radar, right? So it really all depends on what's available to you at the time. If I can't compromise a user account that allows me to create another account, then I may, for instance, change the password to the user account that I was able to compromise, so I can use a password now that I know to log back in. So it really all depends, right? I mean, this is where the guessing game really begins, and how well you did the beginning two steps are going to kind of indicate whether or not, or what avenue you're going to have to take to maintain this level of access.